So this is an exciting piece of equipment that we just got. It's a Ford CL340. The CL340 was the first compact loader that Ford put out between 1971 and 1973. They called these compact loaders back then, but skid steer is really a name that refers to how this equipment is steered. They can't have tracks. This one does not have tracks, it has wheels. I had a little bit of an issue trying to figure out which compact loader this was. Ford had the CL340, the CL20, CL30, CL40, CL55, CL65. Ford has made a lot of compact loaders. I had some issues trying to identify what exactly this was. Ultimately, what I was able to figure out, because this looks a lot like a CL30 or a CL40, is the positioning of this hydraulic fluid tank is kind of a dead giveaway. On the CL30s and 40s, the hydraulic tank is a lot higher. So if you pick up one of these old machines and you can't find anything on there, a good way of identifying whether it's a CL3040 or a CL340 is the positioning of the tank. The CL30s and 40s will most likely still have markings on them. On the CL340, it would have said Ford 340 back here. Nothing back here is legible. I think there's, if I scrape this off, I can see where it says Ford, kind of. This thing looks like a mess. This skid steer went for scrap, but it actually came from a family nearby here. The dad passed away, but he was a bit of a tinkerer and inventor. So when something went wrong, he fixed it. He was probably, a true homesteader when it comes to mechanics. He had all sorts of cool machines that he had put together. So I actually trust this machine more than I probably should. The big problem with this machine is that nobody could find the key to it. It ran a little over a year ago when he had it, but they couldn't find the key. So I found out that he had replaced the ignition with just a $10 ignition switch from your local automotive parts store. This came from Advanced Auto Parts. It's literally 12 bucks. That fixed our key issue. Looking inside the hydraulic tank, the fluid is low, but there's fluid in there, and it's very clean inside this tank. Supposedly he had done a lot of work to the hydraulics before it stopped running. I'm guessing from some of the things I've seen on here and some of the newer parts that I've seen that is true. So I'm hoping I can get this old rust bucket to run. What I'm going to do right now is just kind of walk you through some of the steps that I've been doing and see if there's anything that I can do to help the motor, because it hasn't been started up in over a year. Now, the motor that is in this CL340, I couldn't find a lot of information on CL340s online. There is enough information out there, and when we get to those parts of it, then we'll go through some of that. But the motor that is in here is just a Wisconsin VH4D, which is a pretty popular motor, especially in some of these machines from the 1970s and 80s. The Wisconsin VH4D is a fairly popular motor. It's easy to find parts for. If you've picked up one of these and you have the Wisconsin VH4D engine, you're in luck. If you've got one that has the old Ford 140 motor in it, I can't help you there. Most of them are going to have the Wisconsin VH4D. This video is also going to be good for anybody who has a Wisconsin VH4D in anything that hasn't been started up for a while, because we're focused on the motor at the moment. So let's take a look at this thing. The first thing I did was I have checked over these plug wires. For the most part, these wires don't seem bad at all. They're not cracked. They don't match, but maybe that's supposed to be red for a reason. I don't know. I'm not a mechanic. I pulled the spark plugs. These are Champion D16 spark plugs. Because they haven't been fired up for a long time and they're pretty nasty looking when you pull them out, very black. I know that they're not worn down, but I wanted to go ahead and make sure that I just go ahead and replace those before I fire it up. The other thing we're going to do is when we pull all of these before we fire it up, is we'll actually put some oil down in the piston heads and try and hand crank the engine a couple times to lube up the piston heads. Not sure if the starter solenoid will work or not. I'm hoping that it does, because that's about $100. The distributor cap, none of that looks too old, so I'm hoping I'm in good luck there. These wires that run to the battery are looking pretty bad, so I may have a little bit of work to do with those, but again, I might have some that I can use. If not, then that'll just be another item that I have to work out. The manifold is cracked, but where the gaskets are is fine. So I'm not really concerned about a crack right there. The gaskets though, they don't look to me like they're fitting on there right. I may have to pull the manifold off and put a new gasket kit on there. It's only $15. Over here you can see our carburetor down there, and we have a choke line that comes out and to the front down there. I can't get that choke to move, so I'm going to take that carburetor off and do some work to it. Normally I have pretty good success with some of these older carburetors getting the floats to start working in them and stuff again. As long as the floats don't have a hole in it, I should be able to work with what's there and get it working. Now the fuel line, you'll notice, would have normally come down here to this fuel pump, but it's been bypassed, and then it comes down here. And on this plate here, he had just a generic Mr. Gasket fuel pump. And then coming off of the fuel pump, he had two glass inline Mr. Gasket fuel filters. They're motorcycle fuel filters. I'm guessing whatever setup he had here worked. The fuel filters were in pretty bad shape, so I'm going to go ahead and replace those. They're only about $9 a piece, and we'll put, everything back the way he initially had it. The fuel filter was unplugged from the power source, so I'm wondering if my suspicions of the carburetor he was having issues with, because I also smelled some oil or some gas in the oil. The oil for these is underneath the engine on this left side. The plug is way down there, and if you're working on one of these, you'll notice that there's not a whole lot of space down there. So I used a pan kind of like that and slid it up underneath there. Getting that plug off is a little bit of a beast, but I pulled the plug. The oil's dirty, smells like fuel, and I'm not real pleased with the gas that came out of the tanks. There wasn't any gas in this tank. That tank was really kind of nasty looking, so I may figure out a way to try and clean these two fuel tanks. Fuel tanks, they fill up here, and here you have one on each side. So I'm going to try and flush those before I add fresh fuel to it. This is kind of the first area that I've started working on here, is the fuel system. I also have drained the oil out of it, and I've got, I had to look up the oil filter. The oil filter, if you go underneath this left-hand side and up, it's tucked in back there. It's real hard to reach, but so that's where we are with this project right now. Stay tuned, and we'll be making all these repairs and doing whatever we can to safely start this thing up. When a motor's been sitting for over a year without any operating to it, it's real important to make sure that you go through all of these things and make sure that they're in working order, and that you lubricate that engine before you just fire it right up.